Yesterday, the annual Climate March took place across Canada and here in Ottawa under the banner, "Draw the Line." People gathered, calling for federal investment in climate-resilient housing, a national clean energy grid, taxation of mega corporations, and most importantly, following Indigenous leadership towards a just and sustainable future. This line in the sand was much more than politics. It was a moral and spiritual call for a line in the sand for all of us. What kind of future do we choose, and will we participate in? What path will we journey on together? The urgency of this march and the message from yesterday was palpable throughout the city. Anybody driving anywhere yesterday experienced that. But it was not simply a rally about emissions targets or energy grids. It was a cry from the heart, a demand that our leaders act with courage and vision for people and the planet, not for profit. And it reminded us, as a people of faith, that climate change is not only a scientific or political issue, it is also a deeply spiritual one. It touches every aspect of our lives, our bodies, our families, our communities, our futures. It touches our grief, our fear, our capacity for hope, our resilience, and our courage. Climate change is not a distant threat. We witness it daily. The wildfires and floods and hurricanes and heat waves altering landscapes all across the planet. And from this corner of the world that we inhabit, maybe feels somewhat sheltered, but we're not immune. We all smelled the smoke this summer. The crisis is here, the crisis is now. A congregant recently shared with me a NASA article from 2021, which seemed to have been lost from our attention, in which scientists project, and not to make you even more scared, but scientists project that in the mid-2030s, rising sea levels will combine with natural lunar nodal cycle, which is an 18-and-a-half-year rhythm that amplifies the tides. The result will be recurrent coastal flooding, sometimes occurring daily for weeks at a time, as the rising sea levels and this cycle of high tides combine. Imagine what this means for cities and families and for those already living precariously near coasts and on low-lying islands. This is 10 years away, my friends. The crisis is real and the timeline is short. Unitarian Universalists, we ground our environmental action in our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of existence, of which we are a part. And today we are also guided by the newly adopted statements of values, which are interdependence and pluralism and justice and transformation, generosity and equity, with love at the center. These values, centered on a lasting commitment to love, guide us not only in affirming what we believe, but in how we act, in how we are in the world. It shapes our responses to everything. Our seventh principle teaches us that we are not isolated beings, but part of a larger web. And our values remind us that responding to climate change is not simply about survival, but about shaping a world that is compassionate, and inclusive and transformative. And together, they call us into relationship, not ownership of the earth. Not hierarchy, but mutuality. The old proverb reminds us we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And when we recognize this, we shift from entitlement to responsibility. And then there's the grief and the anger and the fear associated with the climate crisis, and these are also real and need to be acknowledged and responded to. The Unitarian Universalist Association president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, the previous president, wrote that climate change is a source of profound loss. It creates collective trauma for us as a people and the planet. And we know that there is more yet to come. Those who care about humanity's future feel anger at those who scoff at the dangers and would deny the existence of the science that proves it. Yet accepting doom as inevitable is a barrier to effective organizing. And we're good organizers. And we like to be effective. We also know this grief. And we feel the anger and the despair. We feel it when we watch the wildfires and we wonder if our summers will ever again smell of pine instead of smoke. And we feel it when we talk to children of the futures they will inherit. And we feel it when we see climate refugees displaced from their homes with no welcoming place to shelter. And the grief can overwhelm us. It can paralyze us. But grief is not the end. It can be the beginning of resilience, of solidarity, of renewed courage. But we need to organize that. So here I turn to the wisdom of Joanna Macy. Anyone out there familiar with Joanna Macy? She died this past summer in July at the age of 96. But boy, did she leave us a legacy of work. She was an environmentalist, activist, author, and scholar of Buddhism, general systems theory, and deep ecology. And her book, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In with Unexpected Resilience and Creative Power. How's that for a title? She updated that book to follow the pandemic, to recognize the impact that the pandemic had 3 years ago at the age of 93. She taught that experiencing anguish and grief in response to the world's pain is essential for staying connected. To feel grief is to love deeply. And to mourn is to remember how much this world matters. Macy's Spiral of Active Hope is a 4-stage framework within her larger work that reconnects. The work that reconnects, I believe there was a workshop or a series here that somebody led on the work that reconnects. Am I remembering that? Yeah, we might do that again, hey? So this work provides a pathway to meaningful engagement. There are 4 steps. The first one, and I'm going to give you a couple lists this morning. The first one is come from gratitude, to ground ourselves in appreciation for life. Gratitude shifts our focus to abundance and connection. It energizes us. So the second thing is to honor the pain for the world, to feel the grief and anger and sorrow, because denying it is denying our deep love of the world. And the third step in the spiral is to see with new eyes, to remember our interdependence and capacity for transformation, to look again and realize that we are not powerless. And then the fourth step is to go forth again, renewed, to act with courage and creativity and resilience. Renewal is not a one-time event, but a practice. This is a spiral. It's not a linear process. It is a rhythm that we revisit again and again and again. Gratitude leads to grief. Grief to new vision to action, and action back to gratitude. It is a living, moving, breathing act of resilience in practice. So in 2021, another paper came out. Bioethicists David Schenk and Larry Churchill published an essay called, and here's another great title, Ethical Maxims for a Barely Inhabitable Planet. Oh, it's a fun read. It offers 6 adaptive maxims drawn from bioethics work in ICUs and in hospices to guide us through the devastation and transition following environmental and social collapse. These 6 maxims are: work hard to grasp the immensity of change. This means to be informed. Clarity must precede wise action. We cannot respond to what we do not understand. And the second is to cultivate radical hope. This is the hope that reappears after optimism has died. They're different things. This hope, it is stubborn and it is brave. Number 3, and this one's really interesting, have a line in the sand. Decide what you will do and what you refuse to do. It might be, I'm never getting on a jet again. It might be, I am buying that electric vehicle, or I am never getting on, I'm not going to buy a different kind of vehicle. Now, I am feeling really guilty here because my vehicle is gas-powered. So that's a line that I need to consider, right? We all need to find our lines in the sand. The fourth one is appreciate the astonishing opportunity of life at this time. So like Macy's invitation to gratitude, this maxim invites us and reminds us to refill our wells of joy and beauty and connection. The fifth maxim, train your body and mind. Care for yourself physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually, because a resilient self can support others in their struggles. And the sixth one, act for the future generations of all species. To expand our moral imaginations to include all the beings in the web of life. We act not only for our children, but for the forests and the rivers and the creatures who cannot speak for themselves. We act for the wild. These maxims, like Macy's spiral, are practices that shape our hearts and our habits, and they resonate strongly with Unitarian Universalist values of transformation, justice, equity, and generosity, and they remind us that the way forward must be grounded not only in science, but in love and interdependence. And for those of you who are scrambling to take notes, I made a cheat sheet. Yeah. So these are the 2 lists I just gave you. These are the 4 Joanna Macy's Spiral of Active Hope and the 6 ethical maxims that I just laid out. You can take this home. They're at the back on the table. We can make more copies if we need to, but I thought you might want to revisit this around your dinner table, in the discussion group afterwards, just to think and come up with your own ideas about, how do I come back to a place of gratitude? How can I see this with new eyes? And what do I need to know to truly understand what is happening in the world in order to commit to respond to it? I know you guys like your homework. We need both spiritual resilience and systemic change. And Canada's climate adaptation strategy from a few years ago, it aims to protect biodiversity and to prevent deaths from extreme heat and safeguard communities from fire and flood. That's the aim. And these are important commitments. But climate policy alone is not enough, and it is currently under attack. It's being threatened by plans to increase the harvesting of fossil fuels to boost the economy. Now, I get it. It's complicated. We need those lines in the sand. What are we willing to do and what are we not willing to do? What is the future that we can imagine? And what's going to make that happen? We need communities of courage and love and spiritual grounding and collective imagination that can transform how people think, feel, and act towards saving our planet's ecosystems. That's you. Our religious faith and our spiritual values have a substantial role to play in giving people the strength to live with the climate crisis, even if the outcome is uncertain, even if we know it's going to hurt. This resiliency that we can build through our efforts to organize, they create the motivation to act with meaning and purpose and hope. And without informed action, the possibilities for solutions never come into being, and therefore we must. Our Unitarian Universalist values give shape to our climate action. Love calls us to care for one another and for all life. And interdependence reminds us that we are part of one great web. Pluralism invites us to learn from Indigenous wisdom and other faith traditions. And justice demands that we address the inequities for those who are suffering most from this crisis. Transformation encourages us to imagine new ways of living, maybe living without the comforts that we really don't need. And generosity moves us to share the resources that we have with those who do not have access to them. Equity calls us to ensure that all have what they need to flourish. And together, these values give us the moral compass to engage with policy and with action and build our own resiliency and support one another. So tomorrow, at the start of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, let us all be called to change. The reading that we shared earlier reminds us that turning is not easy. It requires will and humility, and yet unless we turn, we remain trapped in yesterday's ways, in yesterday's story. And the climate crisis is nothing if not a call to change, to turn from despair to hope, from greed to generosity, from fear to faith. And turning is never ours alone, it is communal. Yesterday's march was a collective turning, and today's worship service here together is another, and tomorrow we get to make another choice. And each time we gather to light a chalice, to join hands and greet our neighbors, to sing, we enact a turning away from grief and anger and inaction towards life, towards justice, and towards hope. This we do together. Beyond silence, beyond science, beyond policy, what sustains us is our conviction that what we do matters. How we feel matters. How we take care of ourselves matters to the whole world. And the work before us is not easy. The climate crisis asks much of us: honesty and courage, persistence, and love that stretches beyond our own lifetimes. And we will falter, and we will grieve, and we will begin again, over and over. And in this community, we will find the strength to carry the sorrow together and to celebrate what is still beautiful and to kindle the hope that fuels action to begin again in love. So that march yesterday was one turning point, and today's worship is another, and tomorrow will bring another. And each one of us, each day, is part of turning towards a different world. So let us go forward. From here today, from this place, let us go forward into tomorrow, not with despair, but with conviction, with our presence and our choices and our courage to make a difference. And may we be guided by the values that hold us and lift us and the principles that sustain us. And may we just continue to turn towards each other and towards the earth and towards the future and hold it in active hope. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.